Sixth area is somewhat controversial, especially in today's time, where in Florida, the Surgeon General had advocated putting a warning label on all alcoholic beverages because it's really been discovered that there is no healthy amount of alcohol that one can consume. Having said that, alcohol is not banned. It is widely consumed, but anything more than one or two glasses 4 or 5 times a week is considered destructive to your mind and cognition later in life, especially over 65. People should completely give up drinking because of its association with neurodegenerative diseases. Does impact your heart function, does decrease your insulin sensitivity, and gives you that belly fat or beer gut, as it's known. So, although there is no safe amount of alcohol, people in blue zones generally do consume some mild amount of alcohol. Now, whether I didn't do a deep enough dive into it to say if they're just comparing the amount of alcohol drunk in those zones versus people who don't live in them, because alcohol has been pretty definitively demonstrated to shorten your lifespan, increase your incidence of dementia, heart failure, obesity, and diabetes. So I don't advocate the consumption of any alcohol, but if it is to be consumed, it should be consumed at parties with friends, and no more than one or two doses at a time. The seventh area that was demonstrated is a sense of belonging. Now, that goes back to the time of cavemen. And if you weren't part of a community, you were generally ostracized from a community. So if you weren't part of a tribe and were cast out, the overwhelming likelihood that you were going to be eaten by a predator was fairly high. The ability to survive without being in a community was nearly impossible because you couldn't do all things like hunt, gather, cook, create shelter. And so being a participant in a community really harkens back to the first humans. And that gets manifest later in life now in modern times, where, especially in an older population, before we get to the older population, even in teens today, those that don't have a good friend group tend to be isolated. And that is the highest predictor of addiction is loneliness and isolation. And so being part of a group, you end up having group think. You have adopt a group behavior. You have people to call. And then your real friends are those that you can call when you're in a crisis or down. Now, when you get older, many people have died off. And if you don't belong to a community or a church group or an assisted living or a retirement community, you can go a whole day without speaking to someone. Maybe you've got some children that call you once in a while, but if your spouse died, your friends are dead, you can go a day without hearing your own voice. And that's isolating. And that's a very common reason for adult depression. And so people in these groups tend to interact with one another. They tend to have communities, they have activities that are done together, and the activities will keep people young by continuously moving, as was discussed in one of the early factors. But also being alone, it's very, very hard to self motivate. It often takes two or three people to get together and say, hey, let's go to place A, B, or C. If you don't have that group, you tend to not have the incentive or inertia as you get older to perform activities which will keep you young and also will keep your mind fresh. The last thing that was noticed when studying these communities was the so-called right tribe. That in these close-knit areas, the people generally are supportive of one another, and if not, they're somewhat cast out and they're not part of the group anymore. And that has a variety of connotations with it. One is that you tend to have the same values and goals. If you're someone who is Machiavellian or nefarious, you're sort of ostracized from the group. If you're someone who is optimistic and participatory and wants to participate in activities or share in the responsibilities that go along with being in a tribe, that will promote a desire to live longer and live better. If you've ever noticed, if you have a gym membership and you go by yourself, you're going to go much less time than if you have a community that you're going to exercise with, and the expectation is that you're going to turn up every day at a certain point in time and exercise. A good group or a strong tribe creates accountability. If someone's falling behind, there's generally multiple people questioning and saying, hey, what's wrong with you? If all of a sudden you start turning up and you're disheveled or you're losing weight or you're not eating properly or maybe you're down in the dumps, well, someone's going to ask you. Whereas if you're alone or don't necessarily have positive influences on you, they may not care what behaviors you're engaging in. And so a proper tribe is one that's going to promote good behavior, promote, if you're that guy who shows up in every party you're drunk, well, they might say, hey, mate, maybe you want to tone that down a little bit. And so I think that a community, and it's important as we age because there's less opportunity to make friends. Oftentimes we make friends by becoming friends with your kids' friends' parents. And once your kids are out of school and maybe you don't have a hobby, it's tough to just go find a new friend in the end stages of your life. But it is important to have some people that have your back and want what's best for you. And that is demonstrated in these blue communities where friendships and communities tend to encourage longevity. So, in summary, these 9 principles are what was studied in communities where there seemed to be a disparate number of folks who lived over 100. That doesn't mean that you're guaranteed to live over 100 if you just pack up your stuff and move to one of these 5 places. But what it does mean is that since they were studied and since these principles seem to be conserved over all of these communities that were extensively looked at, that applying these principles to your own life and really believing in them to having a long and robust life. So the answer may not be to take supplement that the latest wellness expert is offering. Maybe the true secret sauce is to embrace these 9 principles. Even if it doesn't give you 100 years of life, it will certainly give you a good number of years of quality life.